Today, we're going to be learning about the pawn. The pawn is one of the chess pieces. Pawns can move one square ahead of itself, but on the starting square, it has the option to move forward two spaces. I'll explain more later. It can move either one or two spaces. The pawn alternates the color square it is on, unless on the starting square, it stays the same if it goes two squares. Each side gets 8 pawns at the beginning of the game. The pawn is worth only 1 point. It captures the piece directly diagonal to it, but not the square it can move to. In the starting position, it blocks all of the pieces behind it. The pawn also has a special ability called En Passant, which I'll explain later. That was a lot of information to process, so if you need to, you can pause the video and read it again to understand it better. So, here is the starting position of the pawns. All of white's pawns start on the second rank, and all of black's pawns start on the seventh rank. On these starting squares, it can move up. It can move two spaces or just one space, but after it moves, it can only move one space ahead of it. So let's take the E pawn, the E2 pawn. It can move either to E3 or E4. If it moves to E3, then it can only move to E4. If it moves to E4, then it can only move to E5. So that's how the pawn works. And for black, let's take the A7 pawn. It can move to A6 or A5. If it moves to A6, then it can only move to A5 after that. If it moves to A5, it can only move to A4 after that. All of the pieces are behind the pawn at the start of the game, so it's most common for a pawn to move. Very rarely a knight does, but mostly the first move of the game is usually going to be with the pawn. So here's some pawns. The C2 pawn is on the starting square, so it can move to C3 or C4. The F3 pawn is not on the starting square, so it can only move to the square ahead of it, which is F4. The G5 pawn is not on the starting square either, so it can only move to the square ahead of it, which is G6. These are the squares that these same pawns can capture. The C2 pawn can capture B3 or D3 because it is directly diagonal to it and in front of it. The F3 pawn can capture E4 and G4, and the G5 pawn can capture F6 and H6. The pawns cannot capture backward or move backward. If you've heard of it before, promotion is the best feature about the pawn. If there were a such thing as this, then if a pawn got to the end of the board, it would just be stuck there. In checkers, it just turns into a king, meaning it can move forward and backward. But in chess, it can turn into different pieces. It can either turn into a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. It is the choice. Usually, people promote to a queen, but a rook, bishop, and knight are also possible, depending on the situation. Like there's some stalemate positions where if white promote or black promotes to a queen, or then it's stalemate. So usually they'd promote to a rook. And so it just depends on the position. Mostly you're just gonna promote to a queen. There's also a very special rule with lots of rules behind it, and it's called en passant. So here's how it works. If a pawn is on the starting square and it chooses to move two squares ahead of itself, and there's an opposite color pawn adjacent to it, meaning right next to it, then it can capture that pawn. It can't do that though if it's not from the starting square, and it can't do that if it doesn't move two squares forward. And if you don't do it directly after they move the pawn forward, then the ability to use en passant is completely gone. In this position, you have to find out which piece the e4 pawn can capture. You have 30 seconds, which just started, and if you need more time, you can always pause the video. time is up. The correct answer is that the e4 pawn can capture the f5 pawn because it's directly diagonal to it. The e4 pawn cannot capture the queen because it's behind it. The e4 pawn cannot capture the knight because that's how it moves, not how it captures. The e4 pawn can't capture the bishop because it's not directly diagonal to it, it's further than that. And the e4 pawn can't capture the rook because it's not only blocked by a pawn, but further away than the pawn can actually capture. Now, where can this e5 pawn move? You have 30 seconds to figure it out. If you need more time, you can pause the video, but your time starts now. Time is up. The correct answer is that the e5 pawn can capture the d6 bishop because it's directly diagonal to it. The e6 pawn can't be captured because pawns can't capture the way they move, and there's nothing on the f6 square, so it can't capture like that because there's nothing to capture. So the correct answer is that the e5 pawn can move to d6. To review, the pawn is worth 1 point. Each side gets 8 at the start. It moves 1 square ahead. 2 is an option if it's in the starting position. It's short and it has a rounded top. They can move up to 2 squares if it's on the starting position. It can fork. It's the only piece that doesn't capture how it moves. It can do en passant and promotion. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any feedback, you can post it in the comments or in the forum description of all videos. The forum is completely anonymous, so I won't know who filled it out. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more videos like this one, and so that more people can find these videos so they can also learn the beauty of chess. You can visit the chess playlist to see all the chess videos, and thanks for watching. Good.